First, I'd like to thank Moov and the fintech DevCon community for inviting and hosting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak on my presentation, Balancing Tides, Leading Developers Through Challenging Waters While Maintaining Innovation. My name is Matt Brint. I'm the head of product at Evolve Bank and Trust. I have been in the space of serving technology or finance for about 8 years. The previous 5 years I've served on the product team at Evolve. So as I make my way through this presentation, it really breaks up into about 4 categories. Study the waters, chart your course, adjust your environment, and discover the destination. And I try to be consistent with the colors as well as I make my way through it. So we'll get into it. First, why I view it is important for the product team or product team in an organization to help balance the tides of market forces when working either from the BaaS side or even from the fintech side. So a few notes here. First, just accepting the fact that competitive companies are going to incur a healthy tension, especially when pursuing new or innovative ideas or opportunities related to the fintech space. Second, stakeholders face challenging directives and usually have urgent or high impact consequences. And in terms of stakeholders within a bank, they are given things that they need to focus on and problems that they need to solve, but by their function and by their definition, they are hyper-focused on those issues, and sometimes they can overlook on how that could impact the broader ecosystem and the broader product and solution. Product often has the highest vantage point. We spend a lot of time partnering with these different stakeholders and building those relationships and building that trust and understanding of how they view their piece of the puzzle. And finally, you must be curious to uncover new perspectives and to empathize with the people you're speaking with. And I don't think there's a path to success without empathy, and being a financial services industry and product, it touches a lot of people and has a high level of impact. And so many of the product managers I work with, and I aim to be this way myself, are highly empathetic. They can see the human on the other side of the conflict or see the human on the other side of just a different perspective. And they're willing to see how that person came to that conclusion or that perspective. And I think keeping this top of mind and practicing this is really important in organizations, especially as you try to do something new. And at the end of the day, we all share the same goal, which is to point the ship or the boat or the product, the directive, in the right direction. And when the map's a little blurry or less defined than maybe other areas with lots of highly defined use cases and lessons learned, I guess, that can be a challenge. But building a message and an opportunity to align and to step forward in a common direction, I think is valuable, and I think product's in a position to do that. So first, getting the first section, study the waters. This is relatively high level. I know, the people here today are generally experts in the space, and I'm happy to speak with you. And I guess a key point to keep in mind as we go through this isn't intended to be viewed as binary. It's intended to be viewed as perspectives. And again, touching on that healthy tension that's in there, it's not that BaaS banks only care about 1 and fintechs only care about 0. That's not the way to look at it. It's to look at, well, BaaS banks are coming from this perspective. Fintechs are coming from an alternative or maybe a different perspective. And how do we find that balance? Because the impact is big. And it's essential to our success. So getting into it, BaaS banks focus on infrastructure and compliance. A key question we aim to solve for is how can we offer stability, specifically in the financial ecosystem? Fintechs are focused on UI, UX, and market differentiation. How can they do something different? How can we innovate? And they're hyper-focused on the user and understanding the users and their lives and how this dynamic world around us changes quickly. And where are the gaps? and how can we solve them? Banks are motivated to mitigate risk. And a common perspective that I think I've seen at our bank and at other banks and people I've met at conferences in the space where banks tend to come from, they tend to come from a position of how do fintechs and users fit into our products, what we currently have, or a vendor's products that we can purchase. Whereas fintechs are looking more to see how they can demonstrate that early product market fit, prove out that they've solved the gap and that there's an opportunity here, there's a market here, and really answer the question, looking at their products, how can our products fit the end users' lives? And I think these are two very important perspectives, but it's important to recognize that there's a balance to be struck here when solving these problems. Another really big piece that I've seen difference in speaking to people in the space and collaborating with fintechs and innovators has been the perspective of time. From banks, largely time is an asset. It is, if you have time, you can learn from others and you can collect notes and you can make educated decisions. For fintechs, time is very much a liability or a friction point. They're often operating off some type of investment or funding, and they're charged with solving a gap with limited information in a short timeline to demonstrate that product market fit. And again, another point of tension, and I think it's important to recognize. So one question, and the first two are questions I've heard from multiple players in the space on either side of these perspectives. From a banker side, why would a user need to open a bank account in less than a day? And their perspective is that it's a USD bank account. It's chartered and FDIC insured, and that's a very valuable thing. Why can't you wait a day for that? Which is a real perspective, a valid perspective, something that you can't deny. That's true. Whereas from the fintech perspective, where time is a liability, why would a user consider our product if they can onboard with a competitor faster? That gap, that problem with the user has already been solved. So the work we've done and the effort we've put to taking something to the market is lost. And finding the balance between questions like these are real things I've heard in the space, and I think it helps show the different perspectives. How do we mitigate risk of by introducing a new payment rail? So anything new, you have to look at the risk and see how it affects your change control and what that impact could have on your organization. Fintechs want to create fast and create a simplified experience for the user, again, being really focused on what that user feels when they interact with their products. And so something like new payment methods or faster payment rails are very intriguing to them because of the problems they're aiming to solve. And banks, as I started mentioning at the top of this, where time is an asset, how do you learn from the market? What other first movers are in this space? What roadblocks did they run into? What problems did they have to solve? Now they want to wait and mine some of that information so then they can use that to inform their steps into the space. Not necessarily saying the space is good or bad or favorable or not. It's just collecting more information. So having that time is a real benefit. And fintechs aiming at answer, how can we be first to market? How can we solve this gap and get an early capture of the market share and be known for the company and set of products that solve this problem for users? So we did some background, kind of laying out the waters, the room, the environment we're in, what market forces are at play here. The meat of my presentation is going through these steps, which I've termed navigating the waters. And I'll just hit each one of these quickly, and we'll get further in detail as I go along. So first, survey product behavior. Second, define the problem clearly. Separate givens from assumptions. Design a solution. Test the solution. Analyze data and draw conclusions. Document, distribute, and push. And I've also added the icons to the side, some of the tools we've used. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on those. Might call out a couple as I go through for filling some of these steps. I don't think any of them are super mind-blowing, but they are very helpful. So first, charting the course, surveying the product behavior. The goal here is to measure your product's performance in the market to understand its current state and any future opportunities or investment or advancements you could introduce. So somewhat of a grid here. On that left column, we're looking at survey. And this generally breaks into two buckets. Surveying your product from an external perspective. This can be user feedback, client feedback, meetings or tickets you receive, forms that are submitted, what's being said about you or your competitors in the media, feedback from audits, and regulatory guidance. Internal, you're looking at internal operation issues or problems or tickets that are going back and forth, trends and confusion or errors as they arise, and any type of common trends that someone like your account services might see and questions are being asked. And as you survey and you collect this data, the next step is, and is very helpful, is to really start sorting it into which of this is qualitative, giving us an idea or an impression of what's being said about our product or about the trends, and what's quantitative, what do our internal metrics say, how is the product itself performing, are volumes processing greater or less, are we seeing an increased number of errors, data like that. And when you really get to the more tangible step of solving the problem, it comes to the problem statement. And this is something, it's usually 2 to 5 sentences. It seems small, it seems insignificant, just by appearance. But it's really highly impactful on how you organize your teams, your engineers, your resources, and your engagement. And so I put a lot of attention into this when trying to take, a lot of information in somewhat of a complex environment and distill it down into what actionable problem are we going to aim to solve. And so, I charge this to myself and to the product team with the responsibility of clearly defining the problem in writing, and that really becomes the compass or even the thesis of the team as they work together to build that trust and find a solution. And so goal, I'll just reiterate, 2 to 5 sentences. You try to be clear and concise with the problem. And you try to use terms that are very digestible across stakeholders. Because again, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different groups touch these products. So some notes here for defining the problem. 1, avoid jargon or industry-specific terms. If you do, it's inevitable, plenty of jokes or comments on calls about the alphabet soup that comes with trying to discuss what's happening in real time. If you do have to call out or use jargon, define it in the sentence. Don't say, it's defined on some glossary on another page or link out to this. Define it in place and try to make it as unintimidating as possible to encourage that engagement that you need to be successful. The second bullet I would really like to emphasize because it is the hardest thing, I think, in this whole process to do. And that is don't jump to the end or assume the solution. It is so easy and it is so uncomfortable to be sitting with a problem that the immediate desire, especially in a group, is to raise your hand and say, I know the solution. And maybe you've barely written the problem statement or not even written it yet. It creates ease. It allows you to set yourself up as a leader, potentially. There's some self-gain there. But it's not a good path, and I don't think it actually serves the issue the issue at hand. And usually, to distill and come to a solution that quickly, and you have not even yet articulated the problem, you incur a lot of assumptions. And that is where, I think the greatest risk is. And with that, don't be afraid to stand up, speak, and ask questions. When times are uncertain, it's necessary to speak. It's necessary to share. Don't hide your neck. because the experts in the room are in the best place with the best varying perspectives to help you solve that problem and give you that engagement. And finally, your first draft is garbage. It's always garbage. I want to be a one-hit wonder, type it out as 2 sentences, done, next task. But you should always aim to look at it again and iterate. And maybe this is a little harsh, maybe it's not garbage, but your next draft is better. So with as important as this statement is, take the time. You have the time. Even when things are urgent, even when it's on fire or it hurts, take the time. It's worth the attention. So to make this presentation a little more tangible, I wrote an example out, a little distilled version of what this process looks like to us when we're solving it. And I tried to use a relevant topic, things that comes up often in conversations in this space, real-time payments. And so, as I go through and describe, I'm also going to try to show what it looks like. So first, some version code at the top, a little not exactly accurate for this, but fun. Title of it, RTP posting during end-of-day processing. First, RTP receive processes 24/7, 365, but the core ledger goes offline for approximately 3 hours each morning, end of day. Here, see, I'm highlighting what end of day means. Processing. The payments as a service engine that supports RTP receive transaction must have a method for handling this condition. It's a known condition, we know we're going to be hit with it, which while remaining in compliance with the clearinghouse's network rules. And we'll get more into that later. But it's, again, there's 2 sentences, a couple of compound sentences, really trying to distill, keep our focus on what we're aiming to solve. Chart your course. The next step, I think, really helps you use your resources well. It's when you take all the notes and everything you've taken from surveying, and you take it line by line, and you separate that data into givens and assumptions. So what is a given? A given is things that we know. And how do we know that we know them? Usually you can verify it as true from multiple perspectives, or at least test it from multiple perspectives. And so, you can have, at times, even 2 engineers run, answer the same question, and their data should be the same. That's something that you can comfortably move into the given section. You want this to be as solid as possible. You want to be a hawk going through these bullet points, because the things we think we know are usually when you put it into resources and you take the time to build something and then it doesn't work or something unexpected happens, if you go back and look at your givens, there's usually an assumption hidden in there. Assumptions are valuable as well, but they're data points that have been identified as potential or likely contributors to the factor. Things you think you know. The person who raises their hand and says, I know the solution, right at the beginning of when you're talking about the problem, generally there's some assumptions at least baked into that, if not the potential solution is entirely assumptive. But still worth pursuing, worth investigating. So still following along with the example, I'll hit each one of these givens. RTP receive transactions processed 24/7, 365. TCH requires that funds to post and be made available to the receiver, end users in a fintech's case, account in real time, meaning I send the funds, once they're accepted, they need to post. They want to ensure that real-time experience for the user. The pass engine must perform controls checks and respond to TCH within 5 seconds. RTP receive is being used in this use case and problem set we were solving as a pilot solution, only pertaining to a single use case for a single B2B user. RTP receive transactions that exceed the 5-second window will be rejected by the network. And end-of-day processing runs early in the mornings on Tuesday to Saturday for approximately 3 hours. Each one of these points is verifiable, can be proven from multiple perspectives, And again, this being an example, usually the givens is a longer list, but I kept it to about 6 here, just for brevity. Assumptions, and in these you will hear, some of that like solutioning ideas. The pass engine could ping the core ledger to get the uptime during the end-of-day process. It's common practice. Hit the servers, are they up or are they not, and then use that to be a trigger for the following action. Once the core is identified as down for end-of-day processing, the pass engine can dynamically queue the received RTP received transactions in a service bus until the core ledger is back online. The second bullet is also very similar to that, kind of 2 ways of trying to solve this same problem. And this last assumption I think is important to hit. The core ledger could experience variance in the timing of when it kicks off or completes the process. And what is that variance? How does that impact a proposed solution? And finally, not going to hit this one as detailed as the others, but I like to create a scoping table. When you're getting feedback from users, a lot of times tangential thoughts come up, and you need to keep the working group focused. But a scoping table is a good way to help realign or acknowledge positions that may come up during the call and say, nope, this is only RTP receive. This isn't send that's relevant. We'll have another initiative for that, but let's keep today's meeting focused on the receive use case we're doing. Chart your course. Kind of last step here is design the solution. And I hope you can feel through this presentation the amount of attention it really takes to design a good solution. And it's not that quick hand raise as soon as the problem is presented. Some recommendations here. Design multiple solutions. I'm a big fan of Champion Challenger if you have the time and resources to do it. Boxes and arrows are very much your friends. As a product role serving the space, I find that my position a lot of times is aligning different perspectives and building a bridge of understanding, usually around a problem statement or around a conflict. And so one thing I found very useful for doing that is flow of funds, or at least layouts, high-level layouts of what's happening, because most people tend to do very well with a visual understanding of a somewhat intangible software finance problems at times. Like the mechanisms that move it are not physical cogs and wheels, so try to make that tangible. And put time and effort into finding all the aspects within the scope. I like to start with an overview in most times before zoning into the problem, even though you want to stay focused. Because I think having that, especially for engineers, having that ability to know what they're doing in the context of maybe less immediately relevant steps helps minimize assumptions that maybe didn't get called out. Unknown unknowns, because you can't just write indefinitely. Eventually, you have to act and be movers and doers. And once you reach a consensus with your group, publish and distribute internally the design and the focus and the notes that we're talking through creating today. It will greatly serve you. It will greatly serve the engineers, and it allows for conversations outside of meetings. If 2 stakeholders are meeting, they can both go reference the same docs and align themselves and not require meeting to make sure we're all staying on the same page. Publish your compass. So following this design further, this is the zoom back overview of what a received RTP transaction looks like going through our pass engine. On the right, it reads right to left. So if that offends your eyes, I apologize. It's just the way we do receive right to left, send left to right. But step 1, the pass engine receives an RTP transaction request from the network and following the arrows originally sent by that sending FI. In steps 2 and 3, the pass engine is fulfilling the 2 or 3 requirements we called out earlier of TCH. We're verifying that the account status of the user and that we're available to post right now. And we're running fraud and transaction monitoring and sanction screening in those 3.1, 3.2 steps. And like tumblers of a lock, everything has to click, and if it does, then you can respond back to TCH and say, hey, we approve this transaction. That in scope meets that 5-second SLA. And then in step 5, TCH settles that transactions between the two FIs. So that's when funds are moved, and then notifies each direction that confirming the approved transaction. 6, this is where the funds get posted to the end user, and that meeting that requirement of making funds immediately available. In step 7, where the core is involved, this is where the internal liquidity management and settlement happens, moving money between our internal accounts to reflect that posting. And so 7 is where we're scoping in on this problem we're solving today in this example. But again, I like to give the broader context because you can't really solve this problem just by only being in that microscope tight lens focus. So saving you all the iterations and solutions and potential ways we could solve it and testing and results, just sharing the one that worked. So when you're coming in, 7, you see that attempt to post and that red arrow meaning it failed, right? We got a reject. The server wasn't able to confirm or errored out because it wasn't available. And so the next step is to queue that transaction up in a service bus. And once you queue that transaction, you're looking, there's a time recurrence to retry it. So let's say it's every 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, we're going to try to resend the queue and to see if the core is back up and online. And you see a couple more fails, and then finally it succeeded. All the transactions that were queued during that time post, the transaction has completed that full cycle. And so real advantage of this solution as a whole is that because we took the time to understand the problem, because we broke it down into detail, because we didn't jump to conclusions, some of the final solution ended up being somewhat of an amalgamation of all of the solutions we had. Like all the good ideas and the hands raised in the beginning were valid or at least had validity in them. But instead we came with this one, which is also a really great tool for an outage, right? Even though the target was end-of-day processing, kind of a somewhat known outage on this one step. If an external outage or for any reason this connection is lost, we have a way to handle those transactions in real time without intervention, truly honoring and meeting the requirements and purpose of what a real-time payment service is intended to do and be able to handle. And so this is just a slide of what it looks like on README, which is it's just a markdown documentation site. And when you take a disciplined approach and define each of these things in somewhat common terms, you come out of it with a pretty beefy, understanding and tangibility of the problem that you can share and pull people in from various stakeholder groups as needed. And they quickly get up to speed and not, be caught in the sidelines, maybe trying with a lot of friction basically to give their input, or they try to give their input, but they're way off base because they weren't in the last 2 conversations. So again, this is somewhat of a summarized, shortened version, but I hope it helps demonstrate, what the target state is. Okay, so we did all this information, we ran tests, kind of talking a little more deeper in what it looks like in a go-to-market push. You want to work your way through your environments, perform a series of tests and QA through your lower environments with your QA teams, maybe product or some really close stakeholders to the problem. You really get to a higher level of understanding in your staging environment, and you start pulling in any internal stakeholders who are going to touch it. And many of who weren't in the room when you were solving this problem, or maybe just a representative from their department or division was in the room. This is really where your assumptions and givens get tested and getting closer to that market environment. And finally, when it makes sense and it's available, I highly recommend and in favor of piloting a solution with 1 to 2 clients. So you can test it in real market conditions, getting to that broader, full scope, but also having a really focused use case or a really focused group. So if an error does arise, you're not trying to solve the same problem from 15 different perspectives or several different clients running in the same problem, different use cases. It can make it challenging to solve. Yep. And I'd like to call it here that this process is designed to be cyclical. And I think this is a really important expectation to set up front, especially with leadership, because engineers usually get the heel for this in a lot of aspects, especially when you start with the I know the answer solution. Is because you start in the contrary. When you start with the I know the answer solution, you write the requirements the best that you can. The engineers try to execute them the best that they can. And sometimes you end up solving part of the problem correctly or solving the wrong problem. And then leadership is frustrated because why didn't that work? Why didn't we know that was going to work? And so this methodology we're going through today is designed to be cyclical. It's designed to roll what you learned in the last iteration into your next, recognizing that your next iteration should be better than your last, and having a documented record of givens and assumptions you can go look at, if you run into a hiccup or roadblock further into the process. And 90% of the time and that's an assumptive, it's in the scope of this conversation, that's an assumptive statement. But the majority of the time when I go back and I'm looking through the problem, it's like, why did we miss this? There was an assumption in the given, hidden there or verified from one perspective or not two, and that leads to the error. And so again, be just hawk eyes on the givens. It's better to leave it in assumptions if you're not sure. And yeah, you hit the givens and assumptions again, you refine the solution, and that last step, try to create test cases to really isolate that second layer error you may have seen. Finally, this is the good feeling slide. I know the rest of it is very dense, but discover the destination. And I intentionally use the word discover here because with the complexity of the environments that we're working in and the newness of some of the problems and challenges that are faced by the fintech industry, it very much feels discovered when something works. It's working through the cycles, it's building and charting your own course and your own map and referencing and refining that to have that better method of navigating for future problems and build that stability for yourself and for the organization and industry at large when things get solved well. So again, very important to capture your design and testing notes while doing internal reviews and approval. In your client-facing guides, try to pick out the pieces that might benefit them or kind of help them avoid roadblocks or friction. And capture lessons learned during the development process and try to roll that into your next iteration, even if it's an entirely separate problem. Like one thing that's not in this presentation that I've started doing, because I think it's more clear, in assumptions, encouraging just to write it as a question. Can we ping the server? And in this example, we couldn't, actually. When we tested, various servers and systems go up and down in the core throughout that batch processing end of day. And so we got false positives, which, with such a little margin of error, wasn't a viable solution, and we knew to shift. But, in hindsight still, it might have been better just to write that as a question so people didn't interpret it as a given or as a statement. Really put a lot of attention into building and sharing documentation internally and otherwise. I called out README in this presentation or any type of markdown documentation service. It helps you avoid errors of like, I was looking at an old copy or something like that. If they go and they can see the site, they're seeing the latest. If you push an update, they got the update, they'll see the latest. When people have conversations outside of your scope or vision, they're looking at the latest if they're looking at the site. Would really recommend that. And, all those things considered, tidying it up, push, right? You can confidently push once you've reached that level of approval and understanding internally and feel confident that you know what problem you're solving and what you're putting into production. So last few slides here, I'd like to touch on lessons learned. As a product manager, you can build understanding by translating. There's a lot of operational complexity here, and when you're faced with a problem or a room of conflict or question or uncertainty, you're in uncharted waters, the immediate human response I see time and time again is to point and blame. Oh, it's ops. Ops doesn't know what they're doing. Oh, no, the engineers, they didn't do. Oh, we got bad requirements. It's business. It is so easy and human to do, and people respond to it. They really do. It's highly engaging because when it's uncertain, people want that confidence that, hey, I know the answer. Let's follow that because it's easy, it's understandable. But it doesn't mean it's the most vetted statement, doesn't mean it's the most grounded, and it certainly doesn't mean it's the best direction. And so product has an opportunity to stand up, speak, create resources, create that vision, create alignment internally and with clients and whatever stakeholders in scope, and try to lay out what's truly at play in terms of this complexity. And again, for the engineers, or just more, I guess, mechanical engineering, but complex machines, internal combustion engines, are combinations of simple machines. They get boiled down to a few simple machines that work, and always work, and are reliable. But the complexity comes as you start adding stuff to it. And so if you can help groups navigate and focus their attention on the simple machines at hand, you make the complex approachable. You make it understandable. You lower tensions, and you create at least a certain methodology or path, even if you haven't discovered the destination yet. And I think that is, it's tall order. It's a strong charge for product managers, and I try to instill that with the people on my team. But again, lesson learned, that's a key focus. Know to do it, keep doing it. It's important. Second, white glove service is not the best approach for product development. As an early mover in the space, when we were partnering with fintechs early on, we really try to offer that, replicate what they were doing for their users to them, meaning that as a user, they really want to understand their concerns, adapt to it as much as they can, be responsive, and offer that really white glove service while, in the back end, trying to design towards standardization. With growth, that complexity, it ends up, being more and more difficult to maintain or to shift or make adjustments when it's time, because now you have to push it through 7 iterations or 7 different versions of a similar task. And so we've put a lot of effort into, and I think, putting an emphasis on web-based documentation and creating this shared reality across clients was a really important part of it. But into consolidating all of these solutions into standards and pushing and just requiring the coherence to a standard to make it easier to maintain, to make it easier to solve a problem or quicker to solve a problem, minimize assumptions, external or otherwise, so we can continue to innovate in this space. Third, remove the wallflowers from the meeting. Host focused working sessions. I'm all in favor, and usually it's good and well-intentioned when people are being added to the room. And usually it's entry-level people. It's like, oh, you need to listen to this. I would have to write all this into an email to send to you later, and so just join the call, and then you end up hosting some huge call. But not everyone's extroverted, and sometimes your best people are introverted. And it's a real challenge to speak up and to say what you think, or to question while you're still finding your footing in that certainty. And so don't create friction for engagement. Make sure everyone who's on that team feels important and has earned a spot to be in that room. And it's not just, oh, we're all going to get on and figure it out or whatever. Otherwise, you'll get a message later after you've had the discussion as a team, because maybe the introverted stakeholder had trouble articulating it all in the real time of a conversation or felt they were being spoken over, and you lose that engagement, you lose that collaboration. So create that focused space, accommodate and empathize with the varying, personalities that you can be working with as well. Pilots are the best mechanism for testing. Market conditions, there's no way to fully replicate market conditions. And so doing smaller releases and scaling them out really helps you build, that strong footing and understanding and iterate quickly while your engineers are thinking about the problem and have attention toward it. To avoid, wider spread issues or having to then stress your resources to solve a lot of problems all at once or from varying perspectives. And this last one, no change does not always mean no risk or less risk. If we lived in a static world and a static environment, that statement would be true. No change would mean no risk, but we don't. The lives of our users change. The way we handle money and the financial services that need to be met change. And I think the most responsible thing to do is to build methods and improve those methods on how you can react to that change and how you can collaborate with other partners to accommodate a known condition that we live in change. And so, it doesn't mean change everything all the time all at once, but continue to work and collaborate with other people in the space, share notes to make your change process better. Takeaways for the next voyage. Again, remember that this is cyclical by design. Set that expectation, reiterate it, keep reiterating it, say it, keep it in the forefront of everyone's mind so that if you reach a spot, especially if this is a somewhat new process, that everyone's up to run the next cycle versus frustrated that the destination they were aiming for wasn't as clear as where they first set out, and they have new information now that they have to bring in. And also, this methodology can be used on varying initiatives. I've used it for developing new products or whole new systems, integrating vendors, updating products, even debugging things if there seems to be multiple dynamic or confusing variables impacting a bug. It's not like a clear, it's, quick fix. It's, again, can be assumptive. When there's confusion across teams, this is a really great tool. And always continue to foster the growth and feedback channels and capture the details, write them down. Our memories are faulty and can change and really work more as collages in our heads than they do like something written. So, if you take the time to write it down, you can learn better in hindsight. And your success is really dependent on that engagement of your stakeholders and your users. And so when they do that very human thing of it must be this stakeholder or it must be that stakeholder or, assign blame or jump to the quick solution or like, why can't we just do what I'm saying? I know it. Take the patience. Understand where they're coming from, understand that it is frustrating, and try to reinstill that trust with them because you'll need them in the next cycle. Your crew's organization can be the greatest limiter, and so I really think it's important to recognize that people think differently, they process differently, but try to put them in the right spaces and try to, spotlight their voices where they're the most valuable. So I called out a couple examples here, the difference between binary thinkers, like it's 1 or 0, it's yes or no. They're really great for defining requirements and setting parameters. So when you're at that stage and when you're going through givens and assumptions, really lean on them. Make sure they don't get spoken over if they're introverted. Like they will save you in the end if you empower them in those moments. Flexible thinkers are really good at solution and problem solving. They're comfortable in the unknown. They're comfortable trying new things, writing out multiple solutions, being like, I'm not sure, but maybe if we try it this way, maybe we could run a quick test. Encourage those voices in those moments. But again, make sure that you're staying within the context of the requirements that were set out, or the parameters. Keep them in check some, but use your team to play better together. Don't expect every player to be offense or every player to be defense. There's different roles for different reasons. Encourage dissent during the evaluation of a solution. Everyone, especially when they're collaborating and working towards something, they want it to work. You're encouraged for it to work. You want to have gotten it. You want your first draft to be killer. But don't take silence as a yes. Call out people to give feedback to you. Call out maybe you're not the biggest fan of the solution, or maybe they had trouble buying in. Really try to understand their critiques. It's fine. It's a part of the process. It's the function they run. And try to demonstrate that you understand their concerns in your writing and in the way you communicate as a team. And be exclusive. Selectively choose who's on that team, and it's not always the managers of the department. Sometimes your best individual contributors are somewhere further lower in the org chart, but if they can really step up and they can help you solve the problem and help perform, keep them in the room, keep them encouraged, and use your documentation to keep all the other relevant parties informed. Last slide. So in old Germanic maps, on the periphery of the maps, there would be dragons, or these images of dragons with something along the line saying, "Here be dragons." Dragons are your uncertainty, your unknowns, your risk, and your opportunity. They all come together. So continuing to work with leaders in the space, share what you've learned and lessons learned, to charter that piece of the map is, I think, very important. It minimizes risk across the industry. It creates understanding. It creates some cohesion. And it's really what other people in the space are looking to step into this space are looking for. They want to see what's beyond the chartered area, and they want to learn from the people and the first movers who have gone there. So I hope this methodology has been helpful for you, and in times of uncertainty, stay focused, don't lose faith, and trust that you can discover the destination. That's it. Thank you.